The Mound by H. P. Lovecraft. There is an Indian mound near here, which is haunted by a headless ghost. Sometimes it is a woman. The Mound by H. P. Lovecraft. The story's narrator visited the town of Binger, Oklahoma, in 1928 to investigate certain stories related to a certain nearby mound, which is said to be haunted by a strange indigenous American man by day and a headless woman by night. The local people avoid the place, and there are strange stories of those who dared to venture there either disappearing, or returning insane and inexplicably altered. Being initially quite skeptical, the narrator brings some archaeological tools and visits the mound, noticing that the man pacing it appears closest to the native indigenous Americans, but cannot be identified with any known indigenous American tribe. Through a talisman made of a strange metal given to him by a local chieftain, he unearths a strange cylinder made of the same unidentifiable metal full of hideous engravings and strange hieroglyphics. The mound in the story is located in Binger in Caddo County, which, unlike the fictional towns and locations in the majority of his works, is a real town about 60 miles, 100 kilometers, southwest of Oklahoma City. He places the mound about a third of a mile west of Binger, an area where there are no mounds, which seems to make this geographic detail the only fictional part of its location. There are several mounds in the area, but not as described in the story. One of them is called the Ghost Mound and, according to a local legend, is haunted by ghosts. It is located closer to Yidhra, rather than Binger. It does not look like how Lovecraft described it, and is a natural formation. This is most likely the mound that inspired Zelia Bishop to present her story idea to Lovecraft. It is possible a second nearby mound, known as Dead Woman Mound, may also have inspired her. Unlike the first, there is no ghost story connected with it, though it gained its name when the buried body of a dead woman was found there. Upon discovering a scroll written in Spanish in the cylinder, the narrator returns to his host and begins to translate it. The contents of the scroll, covering a large part of the narrative, describe the travels of one Pánfilo de Zamacona y Nuñez, an Asturian explorer, almost 400 years prior. Zamacona recounts how he was a part of an expedition from Mexico to North America, and how, through the help of a native indigenous American, he discovered a vast underground world filled with grotesque temples, and populated by strange beasts, and a highly advanced telepathic civilization who worshipped Cthulhu. Cthulhu is a great old one of great power who lies in a death-like slumber beneath the Pacific Ocean in his sunken city of Arlai. He remains a dominant presence in the eldritch dealings on our world. Yig, the father of serpents, is a half-anthropomorphic great old one who was worshipped as a god in Central America and the southern states of the USA. While he had an arbitrary and capricious nature, he was also fiercely protective of his serpentine offspring and would punish anyone who dared harm them. He is the father of Iig and the mate of the outer goddess Yidhra. Yidhra has been on Earth since the first microorganisms appeared. To survive in a changing environment, she gained the ability to take on the characteristics of any creature that she devoured. Over time, Yidhra split herself into different aspects, though each part shares her consciousness. Even though Yig is quick to anger, he is also easy to please as long as no harm comes to his children, the snakes. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, is an outer god, and until a certain incident Tsathoggua. The members of the underground race who lived in what they called the Kingdom of Canaan welcomed him, but the more Zamacona learned about them the more fearful he became. The Canaanians had attained immortality and subjugated other races before them, had the technology to biologically modify vanquished races and other life forms and reanimate the dead for use as slaves, and could dematerialize and rematerialize at will. The underground people also engaged in sadism, depraved practices, ritualistic orgies, and unspeakable horrors such as random body modifications and mutilations of other slave species as entertainment, to gratify their time-dulled senses. The bored inhabitants, desperate for new stimulation, are thrilled to have a visitor from the outer world, and through them, Zamacona discovers the history of the mysterious world. The Canaanians are not the first advanced civilization of the world, and have built their society on top of another realm, which in turn had been built on another dark world even further beneath. They know little of the previous inhabitants, though it's implied that the Canaanians' beasts of burden, a kind of quasi-mammalian quadruped, are the non-sentient degenerate descendants of the previous race, as they had first been found in the ruins of the older civilization. They also tell him of their exploration of the lightless realm, whose inhabitants worshipped a being known as Tsathoggua, worship the Canaanians brought back with them, but was eventually outlawed after the discovery of a hideous secret in the dark realm that may have caused the extinction of its inhabitants, the descriptions of which resembles a Shoggoth. The Canaanians would develop a very advanced civilization, but eventually regressed somewhat after finding no further use for technological advancement, returning to using their vast mental powers and beasts of burden for labor. As Zamacona observed their decaying social condition and their reactions to his telling them of the surface people, he feared that they would one day decide to invade the outside world, where, given their advanced powers, they would be unstoppable. However, his hosts, who once had settlements on the outside world until the last ice age forced them underground, fear it, and refuse to let him leave, out of fear that he would tell his countrymen of their realm, and their boundless greed for gold would attract an invasion, something Zamacona fears is inevitable, as more and more Europeans are arriving in the New World. Eventually, Zamacona attempted to escape with Tsathoggua, a female Canaanian native who knew of an unguarded entrance to the surface world, carrying with him a cylinder containing a scroll that recorded his story, which he hoped would warn the surface world of the underground threat. However, he was betrayed by one of his biologically modified slave creatures and was captured. Tsathoggua was sentenced to unspeakable tortures and mutilations at the amphitheater and ended up as a headless zombie guarding the entrance, the headless woman in Ms. Bishop's brief synopsis, while Zamacona was spared because they wished to extract more of his knowledge. Later on, he attempted another escape, which resulted in the cylinder containing the scroll being deposited on the mound. His narrative ends quite hurriedly and abruptly. The narrator is shocked by the scroll but remains skeptical, so the next day he goes to the mound again for further investigation, repeatedly telling himself that this is an elaborate hoax. Upon digging in a depression on the mound, he discovers a staircase leading deep underground, where he encounters dematerialized beings patrolling the tunnel. They are prevented from making the narrator one more victim, by the talisman of unidentifiable metal, as well as the remains of equipment brought by explorers before him, some of which now has become partially dematerialized. Driven to near hysterics already, the narrator finally comes across a fully material entity at the sight of which his nerves completely break down, sending him fleeing wildly back to the surface. That entity is revealed to be the completely mutilated and reanimated corpse of Zamacona with a message inscribed onto his chest in broken Spanish by the underground race. The message reads, "Seized by the will of Kanyan in the headless body of Tila Yub." On its white and only slightly hairy chest some letters had been gashed or branded. I had not stopped to investigate, but had merely noted that they were in an awkward and fumbling Spanish, an awkward Spanish implying a kind of ironic use of the language by an alien inscriber familiar neither with the idiom nor the Roman letters used to record it. The inscription had read, "Sequestrado la voluntad designa en el cuerpo decapitado de Tlaub," seized by the will of Kanyan in the headless body of Tlaub.